So welcome, everybody. I know people are riveted to hear from two lawyers. But I actually wanted to just take a minute. This is Ryan and my's fourth year of doing a session like this. And I love to see that we've had just as many people attend. Somehow we've got to remove the legal piece. I know, no, it's good. I do see some friendly faces, and I appreciate everybody being here. But I did want to take a step back and just do a little bit of an introduction for myself and allow Ryan to do the same. So for those who don't know me, I'm Kaniah Konkoly-Thege, and I am the Chief Legal Officer. I wear a lot of hats in Senior Vice President of Government Relations for Quantinuum. But before that, I was with Honeywell Quantum Solutions, and I was reflecting this year. I've been in the quantum field for 8 years. And for those of you who've been in the quantum field for a very long time, that is a very long time. And I sometimes joke that I'm the first business lawyer who stepped into the quantum field. Now, I don't know if that's accurate, but I have yet to meet someone who's been doing it longer than me as a true business lawyer. Now, certainly there are lawyers that have been with very large companies who have assisted the quantum unit. But a lot of the small startups really didn't have lawyers for a while. So if you do happen to know a lawyer who's been doing quantum for longer than 8 years, I'd love to meet him. But in the meantime, one of the things that very early on became a passion for me is really seeing the intersectionality of some of the policy and regulatory and legal issues that were coming about that would have a major impact on quantum, and seeing particularly in the early days, seeing a real split between policymakers who are very, very smart on policy, but maybe didn't know quite so much on quantum, and the quantum scientists who, of course, are brilliant, but maybe don't have a fulsome appreciation of how policy and lawmaking and regulatory processes work. And so very early on, as soon as I was myself trying to figure out ion trapping systems, I started getting involved with our government relations team. I started really trying to get an understanding and seeing kind of the intersectionality of policy and of technology. And so this has become a passion of mine, and really want to thank the organizers here for giving us the opportunity for our fourth year to really talk through some of this stuff. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan, and he can give you his origin story.
Sure. My name is Ryan McKenney. I'm the Director of Government Relations, and I'm also a lawyer. Do mostly compliance on our in-house legal team. I am a cybersecurity and tech transactions attorney by trade, and so I came to quantum in law school mostly from the cybersecurity angle related to China, to Shor's algorithm, to the scary side of quantum, because that is the piece, obviously. Lawyers care about the bad more than the good most of the time, and that's how I learned what quantum computing was. Became fascinated by it. Started getting involved, trying to pitch this to the American Bar Association, to the Practicing Law Institute. Where can I fit in? Where do lawyers care about quantum? And that was somewhat difficult, but then got connected more with the quantum community. Took a lot of classes, was writing about the cybersecurity piece, did some AI work at several law firms, and then found the QEDC, the Quantum Economic Development Consortium, and so helped co-found the Law and Policy Committee at the QEDC, and really found this intersection of quantum and policy. And have been doing that now for around 4-ish years, and have been at Quantinuum now for almost 3. And I'll just echo Kaniah's piece in terms of the interest in quantum across the US federal government and obviously across the world has grown exponentially. We've seen $42 billion of public sector money across the world into quantum. We've seen obviously much more than that on the private sector, and even just at the congressional level, the folks we meet with, whether across the executive branch, the White House, administrative agencies, executive agencies, or at Congress. Early on, it was very much, if you knew what quantum was at all, you only knew about China. You only knew about Shor's algorithm, or maybe you had a national lab in your district or state. Now, quantum is an unbelievably bipartisan issue, obviously, and we'll talk about this in a moment. The NQIA has yet to be reauthorized, but generally, quantum is extremely bipartisan, and there's a lot of folks on the Hill who have learned a ton about quantum, have put in the time to come visit our site, the sites of fellow quantum companies, understand the differences across quantum sensing, quantum networking, quantum computing, and how important it is for national and economic security alike. And that has been fantastic to see. And Quantum World Congress, honestly, has played a huge piece in that, having Michael Kratsios, the director of OSTP, having Senator Warner record their videos, be present, have all of these policymakers from across the federal government is so key, especially the next 4 to 5 years. The federal government plays an integral role in all of our success as companies and in the United States succeeding to maintain and accelerate its lead in quantum technologies. So we can, I guess, move forward into the specifics of our discussion.
Sure. So as all good senior lawyers do, I tasked Ryan with helping come up for me with talking points. And then, as all good senior lawyers do, for those of you who are lawyers in the crowd, I approached him a couple hours ago and said, hey, you know what? I want to change everything. So poor Ryan.
Just my talking points were so bad.
No, they were fabulous. But what I did say is I thought it might be fun to do it a little bit more of a fireside chat and Q&A. So with that, I'm going to ask Ryan to give us a little bit of his observations around NQIA, and then I'm going to ask him some questions. So
sure. So you heard, if you were in the session first thing this morning with Michael Kratsios' video, the National Quantum Initiative Act was first signed in 2018 during the first Trump administration, and that allocated about $1.2 billion across the federal government to drive quantum research. And in 2018, when that was signed, that was an absolute watershed moment, and it built a huge lead for the United States in quantum. Obviously, in the last 7 years, the world has changed a lot, and we've made a ton of hardware advancements across the different modalities, quantum companies, and the quantum algorithm software and middleware has also made huge advancements towards identifying near-term use cases, bringing in timelines, and advancing closer towards fault tolerance. That has also meant that our allies and adversaries alike have spent, again, billions of dollars on quantum, and have put together some pretty complex strategic national quantum strategies, oftentimes for smaller nations leveraging the comparative advantages that they already had in particular industries, leveraging their national labs, their industries. And so it's no longer quite the delta between the United States' quantum competence and level and those of our allies and adversaries. They have absolutely spent the money, built the ecosystems, and advanced their own national quantum strategies. In the US now, in 2023, on September 30th, the original NQIA was due to be reauthorized. So in 2 weeks, we will now be at the 2-year mark of needing to reauthorize the National Quantum Initiative Act. The current draft, the most recent draft in the House that got out of the, or was unanimously approved by the House Science Committee during the last Congress, allocates $2.7 billion for quantum across the federal government. But unfortunately, that was not brought up for a vote in the last Congress. And at the moment, we are still working tirelessly as an industry to reauthorize the National Quantum Initiative Act. What's great about this current draft that is currently sitting in, the House Science Committee and the Senate Commerce Committee is that it really prioritizes commercialization. So it brings in the Small Business Administration, it brings in NASA, it brings in a bigger swath of the federal government, and it really tasks specifically the DOE and NIST under the Department of Commerce with advancing commercialization, thinking about things like quantum test beds, advancing some of the quantum networking advancements that have been made through NSF, prioritizing supply chain, and building a quantum-ready workforce. So we're moving again from the lab to the market and trying to commercialize, but this is absolutely, from a policy aspect, nothing is more important than reauthorize the National Quantum Initiative Act. It's an important signaling mechanism, it drives US leadership, and it's very important for us as companies to be incentivized to, again, work with the federal government and drive the quantum abilities and the quantum work that's being done at the national labs and across the federal government.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it is exciting, and I would say Quantinuum, having the opportunity to have locations all around the world, definitely sees various jurisdictions really stepping up their efforts, and not just stepping up with funding, but really having it be focused funding. Yeah. And I think, and sometimes that's a lot easier for smaller jurisdictions. A large country like the United States, it is challenging to have as focused of a funding opportunity. But one of the things that I thought was interesting is really seeing this move from basic research into practical applications. Where do you think this will have the biggest impact?
I think what's most important is, again, during the next, we've seen a lot of timelines and roadmaps laid out at this conference in the last few weeks and months as a quantum industry, which is very exciting. But I think during this next 3, 4, 5 years towards fault tolerance, as we all continue racing to build these technical milestones, working with the national labs, I think is the most important piece. The Department of Energy has amazing researchers and has found ways to build quantum into the important work that they're doing, finding hybrid results between classical supercomputers, classical computers, even AI and GPUs, and quantum. And so we as industry need to be incentivized to work with them, and for the government to send a demand signal both as a buyer of quantum systems. Our new phrase recently is, you cannot have an ecosystem without a system. We think it's really, really key for national labs and academic institutions to build workforce, to build near-term use cases on today's systems, not just for our system, but across all modalities. And we think the Department of Energy, the national labs, the NNSA is really well positioned to do that. And I think the NQIA lays a great base authorizing the funding to do so and sending that clear demand signal.
So talking about investment areas for a second, what do you think is the most critical area, workforce or supply chain? And do you think NQIA will address it?
NQIA, the current draft to be reauthorized does focus on both. In terms of what's more important, that's a very difficult question, because without workforce, you don't have the people, the brains, the hands to actually build the machines. But also without supply chain, if you don't have the enabling technologies, none of us in this room at this conference will be able to scale and reach fault tolerance. So I think making sure that researchers are incentivized to come to the U.S., to study at U.S. universities, to do fellowships at national labs, and then work at quantum companies is absolutely key. If we lose that, if we see brain drain of quantum physicists, of quantum technicians, engineers, all the way down to, again, the technical level, people who weld on superconducting machines, that is an unbelievably important skill set that we have to keep here in the United States. It's an issue of national security. But that being said, from a domestic policy and an industrial policy standpoint, I think supply chain in some ways may be more important. I think the brittleness of the quantum supply chain cannot be overstated, and the fact that there's a lot of single points of failure, particularly around cryogenics and optics and photonics, is an area where we have to both friendshore and onshore, because again, none of us really will be able to scale without that. And so thinking post-NQIA too, I think the incentivizing U.S. fabs to build quantum chips is absolutely key. And I think that making sure that we are incentivizing the laser makers, the optics makers, the cryogenic and dilution refrigerator companies to expand, to be supported, and to potentially even open up U.S. offices is super, super important. I think the NQIA, again, lays a base for that, and I think there's a much bigger piece of industrial policy that we as an industry need to start discussing once we can reauthorize NQIA.
Well, let's keep our fingers crossed that it will be reauthorized. Let's talk about post-NQIA for a minute. How do you see the government acting as an early customer to bridge the quantum valley of death, if there is one? We'll all keep our fingers crossed for those of us with companies that there are not. But how do you see the U.S. government playing a role there?
Yeah, I think one thing I do worry about is hype and the valley of death, and also just the boom and bust cycles where we've seen AI winters, we've seen the dot-com bubble, making sure that we as an industry are being honest brokers with the government in terms of where we are in terms of hitting our technical milestones, but also that we are working hand in glove with the government. Again, I alluded to this earlier, as both as a buyer and as a co-developer of bespoke solutions that are, again, hybridized is really, really important, especially to get us through the next, again, 3 to 5 years until we kind of all hit these milestones that we lay out at these types of conferences. And I think the U.S. government, it's important, I think, sometimes to take a step back and look at the 30,000-foot view, where the U.S. government agencies, the military, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Energy, they don't want solutions simply because they are quantum. They have government mission problems, whether those are related to equipping the warfighter, whether those are related to protecting the nuclear stockpile, thinking about the effects of aging on plutonium at the NNSA, or the Department of Transportation, thinking about logistics, thinking about next generation infrastructure. They have problems that need to be solved. And we as a quantum industry can work with them to identify the near-term use cases that we think can be unlocked on our roadmap, and do so in a way that combines that with the supercomputing and computing capabilities, as well as, again, with this administration, AI is absolutely key. We've seen a huge AI action plan. We've now seen 4 executive orders, and we've seen the Stargate proposal of potentially $500 billion being invested in in AI data centers across the country. And so we, as a quantum industry, have to do a better job of aligning our capabilities and long-term solutions to these already existing government critical missions and the investments already being made across the federal government. I mean, we're kidding ourselves if we pretend that budgets aren't tight, and if quantum is not going to have an unlimited budget. I think that's part of the reason that some folks in Congress are somewhat hesitant on quantum, because they see it as a very complex science, they see it as something that is often 5 or 10 years away, and they see us as an industry having multiple modalities and not wanting to pick winners and losers. So if government is incentivized to, through NQIA and otherwise, invest in quantum, work on quantum, and then we come to the national labs, the Department of Transportation, the Pentagon, with solutions that can be integrated, that incentivizes all of us to work together. It helps us get through the valley of death, and it helps the U.S. government show real return on investment that drives, again, results towards these missions.
AI is a big topic. I'm also going off script. Can you tell I've gone off script the whole time?
There's no script.
That's what I like to do for people who work for me. Just kidding, Ryan. But I think AI is a really important point here, because I think AI in many ways sucks the air out of the room on the dialogue of quantum. In many ways, AI is easier for a lot of policymakers to understand than quantum. But really, from my perspective, I think we do everybody a disservice by decoupling the potential of AI and quantum. And again, you have to you can't overstate it. However, to the extent that we're talking about infrastructure and data centers and some of the challenges that are facing, GPUs right now, cooling techniques, being able to really talk through hybridization, quantum computing, AI, and HPC hybridization, I think is a really critical area. Yeah. Before I go any further on that, I'm mindful of the time, and maybe we should turn to the other big topic that happened between last year and this year, and that is export controls. So for the past several years, Ryan and I, and many others of you sitting out in the audience there, have been talking about export controls in the US government and what would happen. And of course, in 2024, after several different nations adopted certain export control rules, the US government did as well. And so as a little bit of background for folks who don't fully understand export control, or maybe the rationale behind it, I'll give a little bit of background. Typically, you have 2 different types of controls when you're talking about technology. You have controls that are managed by Department of Commerce, and that's typically for things that are called dual-use items. So think like night vision goggles. I like to use this example because obviously night vision goggles are used by warfighters on the battlefield, but you can also find them at Disney's Animal Kingdom to go look at giraffes at night. Very great example of dual use. And then many people are familiar with ITAR. ITAR is managed by Department of State. You're talking about it's international trafficking in arms and something. Arms regulations.
Arms regulations.
Thank you. ITAR is not what we're talking about today. And from my perspective, ITAR controls associated with quantum computing should be quite a ways away. It is not, the technology is not advanced enough to be talking about ITAR today. So we're talking about Department of Commerce and dual use. Typically in the dual use world, you had something called the Wassenaar Arrangement, and it was roughly 42 countries that would come together and align on what technology would require a license. And it was supposed to be basically seamless around these different countries. So they would have a number, all of the specs would match up across, say, the United Kingdom and the US and Austria and Germany and Australia and whatever, and Russia. Russia was part of this. And so as governments started to describe what, how to control quantum computing, or quantum computers, Russia invaded the Ukraine, and a lot of the dialogue fell apart. And so for several years, nations, I think, were having, we'll say, unilateral decisions, likely closed-door discussions, but unilateral decisions around what these controls look like. And so what we started to see last year is various nation states around the world began to adopt the same standard. Now, the good news is that those standards were very rooted in, we'll say, technological capabilities. They were very thoughtful in how they identified the technology. And to back up a little bit, I won't walk through, the various qubit numbers and the C0 errors that are associated with those numbers of qubits. But starting in the late 18, 19, 20, 21, there was a general, we'll say, rumor happening that the government wanted to impose controls that would be at a 200 qubit standard, and there was no real dialogue around what that technology would entail, right? And that's very problematic for an industry that is so nascent that really doesn't have great benchmarking and a good, there's more today, but at the time, really being able to define what a qubit was and what that control would look like and how it would apply. And so after a number of years and a lot of dialogue with a lot of different agencies that all really recognized, that they wanted to do the right thing, these controls came into place. And I would say, thanks a lot to the work of QEDC and some of the work that Ryan McKenney put in towards the QEDC, along with several of you I see in the audience. I think the US government listened and they imposed very smart controls. They did take effect. And I'd say where we're at today is we are hearing dialogue that the EU itself, so up until this point, you had the UK, you had France, you had the Netherlands, you had the US, you had Japan, you had Germany, Italy, I think, and there were a couple others. But right now, the EU is currently having dialogues to basically adopt those same standards, which will make it a lot easier now for quantum companies operating globally to know what they need to do and how they can have these dialogues.
I was going to say, let me ask a couple questions on the export control piece. So yes, we have this interim final rule. What about the rule do you think struck a good balance between allowing industry to be innovative, be able to ship and do business with foreign countries and even hire foreign nationals?
Yeah, so the first thing I'd say is, the US government did not impose deemed export. And so deemed export is essentially where you have a foreign national working for you here in the United States, and as you talk to them or share technology with them, that typically under the export rules would be considered a deemed export. Most countries don't actually have this rule, but it is in the US. And that was a big, big concern because, as Ryan talked about a little bit earlier, workforce is a huge, huge issue. And so of the PhD physicists that graduate every year, I believe roughly 2/3 of them are foreign nationals coming out of the United States alone. And so having a rule that would require all companies to go and get a license to talk to their own employees would be a huge burden on all but the very largest companies that have kind of the back office lawyers and export control officers who would know how to navigate the system. So the risks there were pretty high. So the fact that the government did not impose this structure is a really good thing.
I'll add on to that in terms of just if you're a quantum company that is smaller and you don't have export control counsel, which can be extremely expensive, if you're not part of a big lobbying group already, the work that the QEDC, as Kaniah mentioned, did related to export control was really well listened to by BIS, the Bureau of Industry and Security under Department of Commerce. And the final rule that came out, it came out last September. It went into effect on November 5th last year. The final rule even acknowledges that having to get a license basically to avoid this deemed export issue and having to get a license for some of the countries that most of us do business with would be detrimental to innovation, I believe was the quote that was used. So having that being acknowledged by the government is absolutely, proof that the government across, that was the Biden administration, this is the Trump administration, is very willing to talk to industry. And they know how important quantum computing is to national security and economic security alike. And we went from this fear across the industry of, oh gosh, they're going to put like a 200 qubit hard number on export control and not think about things like error rate and fidelity and deemed export. And that is absolutely not the case with this interim final rule. It acknowledges the importance of foreign nationals. It acknowledges the importance of no country or company can do it alone on quantum. We absolutely need the enabling technologies related, again, especially to cryogenics and photonics. And we need to be able to ship and move that IP across borders and to hire folks without a huge administrative burden at this early stage of the technology.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I would mention, I mentioned this last year, and I will say it again. Actually, after I mentioned it, several people came up and thanked me for it, so I feel like I'm doing a public service announcement. If you do not have, if you're a smaller company and you're out there and you don't have a government relations team, or a lawyer or someone to help you in this field, certainly turn to QEDC, but start this dialogue early. This both administrations, but particularly this administration, is very keen on hearing from industry and hearing what our pressure points are, and I think that's a really, really important dialogue to start with government officials. They need to hear where there are issues and concerns.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think they're very open to industry feedback, and this administration, especially, as we heard from Director Kratsios, loves deals and loves the fact of U.S. technology being exported to other countries. And so where we as U.S. companies can talk about the innovations that we are moving towards on our roadmaps, and being able to export that and sell that to foreign nations, that is absolutely music to the administration's ears. And I think they're very willing to work with us on things like export controls and figuring out, again, how to partner with government and industry so we can export quantum technologies out, again, from the lab to the marketplace and from the U.S. to the world.
And I want to move on to my other questions around cybersecurity, but I would be remiss to note that one of the things that kind of goes hand in hand with export control is also CFIUS. We won't touch on that because not much has changed this year. But if you have not had the pleasure of going through the Committee on Foreign Investment within the United States, or frankly, any other foreign direct investment with any engagement that your company may be doing in foreign places, just be aware that technology like quantum that does have export controls will likely be considered some form of critical technology, some language like that. And as you're looking to do investments in other locations or possibly take on investments yourself, you may be triggering those rules. So just a public service announcement. But in the few minutes we have remaining, why don't we talk a little bit about cybersecurity and PQC migration?
Sure. So again, at a high level, I mentioned this earlier, but I was a cybersecurity attorney. That's how I came to quantum. I may be a little bit in the minority here, but I think it's absolutely critical for us as an industry to acknowledge the fact that there is huge cybersecurity risk related to quantum computing. From a policy standpoint, when we're on the Hill, when we're talking to this administration, when we're talking to other foreign governments, pretending that threat of a future fault-tolerant quantum computer running Shor's algorithm and breaking encryption, pretending that doesn't exist does not help us at all. I think the best strategy is acknowledge the risk, applaud, as I'll get to, NIST and the great work that NIST has done on PQC algorithms, and the best way to deal with that is continue funding quantum research. Whether or not you're talking to a policymaker who is, a China hawk, a national security person, if that's why they care about quantum, great, use that to your advantage. Let's continue to fund the research. Let's make sure that we bring these near-term use cases for good, the drug discovery, the material science, computational biology, all of the amazing reasons that all of us went into quantum, that our scientists work day and night to build these computers. Absolutely talk about those, but acknowledge that the risk does exist and that quantum itself is part of the solution. I always say quantum is a sword and a shield. Will quantum eventually break RSA and most forms of public key encryption? It will, but quantum also is a driver and an innovator of next generation cybersecurity, whether those are quantum random number generators, which our company has a product called Quantum Origin, or quantum key distribution. Those as part of a defense in depth strategy of cybersecurity where the NIST PQC algorithms, which were standardized last August, so it's been now a year since we've had those standardized, That transition is absolutely key. If it's your critical infrastructure, moving towards PQC by 2030. If you're another organization, not critical infrastructure by 2035, starting that long and arduous process of moving towards PQC while also thinking about quantum as a cybersecurity solution.
Can I just
Very
say
important.
really quick in our 25 seconds we have
Yeah.
left? So at the start of my career, I worked for Department of the Interior, and in 2002, a federal judge ordered the entire department to disconnect from the internet. And part of my job was to help them, each office and bureau, to reconnect. It is a wild case. It could be a whole nother panel in and of itself. But let me just say, neither the government nor company should ever underestimate just how complex it is to be able to understand the layers upon layers that networks exist on, and how challenging it will be to implement PQC.
Absolutely.
So, thank you very much, everybody. We appreciate your time.
Thank you all.